episode of Mr. Ashodi's Snapshot Science. Now in today's video, we're going to be looking at the human nervous system. Now hopefully by the end of this video, you're able to name the neurons and the structures involved in the nervous system. We then want to go on to outline the process of a reflex. And finally, we want to explain the process of a nerve impulse crossing a synapse. So don't get startled, let's get to it. Now guys, when we think about our senses, we're thinking about our touch, our sight, our taste, our hearing, and our smell. They're all really linked because they help us. They help us convey messages, okay? And these messages can be really important because they could be linked to the nervous system. Now guys, the nervous system is made up of very special cells, and these cells are called neurons. Now these cells are very specially adapted in order to transmit messages across the body very quickly as it may be needed. Now, this is an example of a neuron which we'll zoom into in a minute, okay? Now, they have long, thin fibers of cytoplasm, alright, and these stretch out right from the cell body, which we'll see on the next slide, okay? Now, the longest fibers are called axons, alright, and the shortest are called dendrites. Now, the dendrites will pick up the electrical signals from other neurons and pass electrical signals along to the next neuron, which will make sense of this as we go along. Okay, so this is an example of a neuron. Now this in particular, there are 3 neurons that we need to know about. This in particular is a motor neuron. Now as you can see, the electrical impulse will be passed from here along in this direction. Okay, this is really important that you're able to draw or label one of these guys. So pause the video and just sketch and label this. Okay guys, so hopefully you've paused the video and you've sketched and labeled this. Okay, now let's look at, in particular, this neuron. Because over here you can see we have something called a myelin sheath. Okay, now this myelin sheath wraps around the nerve fibers and it's made of fat and protein essentially. Now what the role of the myelin sheath is the myelin sheath essentially insulates the nerve fibers. Now this insulation helps speed up any electrical impulse that travels along the neuron. Okay? Now the way it works, as you can see here, we've got tiny gaps in between the myelin sheath. Okay? It doesn't cover the whole neuron. Now what these tiny gaps are able to conduct electricity. Whereas the myelin sheath, okay, they're insulated, so they don't. So essentially any nerve impulse, any electrical impulse that's traveling along the neuron will jump between these gaps, okay, speeding up the electrical impulse very quickly. Now these gaps are known as our nodes of Ranvier, okay, and they're very useful, okay. For example, a myelinated neuron could transmit impulses as fast as 100 meters per second, okay. A non-myelinated neuron, okay, could transmit impulses as fast as 5 meters per second. So there is a big difference, guys, okay? And that's why our neurons are wrapped in these myelin sheaths, okay? It speeds up the electrical impulses. Now, guys, when we're looking at our nervous system, we're going to focus on our central nervous system and our peripheral nervous system. Now, our central nervous system, as you can see, is made up of our brain and our spinal cord. Okay? Whereas our peripheral nervous system is made up of our nerves and our receptors, our things that receive impulses, which we will look at next. Okay? Now, if we focus first of all on the central nervous system. The central nervous system is made up of these neurons. Okay? For example, we looked at the motor neuron before. Okay? Now the role of the central nervous system is to really coordinate messages and responses. It's really important, okay? This could be involved in protection, in helping you get away from danger or avoid harm, etc. Okay? So, what we're going to look at is how the central nervous system can help protect us from harm. Okay, this is an example that we'll look at. Now, there are some key terms that you need to know and be familiar with. So, for example, we have a stimulus. A stimulus is a change in the environment, okay? So for example, something really hot, okay? Then we have a receptor. We looked at these receptors and we looked at they're essentially our sense organs, Okay, so for example, our eyes, our skin, our tongue, etc. Okay, ears. Okay, we then are going to look at our sensory neurons. Now these sensory neurons, guys, really pick up signals from our sensory receptors, from the sense organs. That's why it's called a sensory neuron. Alright, we then go on to our central nervous system, which, as we looked at before, guys, we said is made up of our brain and our spinal cord, and these are really important in coordinating response. Okay, we then go and look at our motor neuron, and the role of the motor neuron is to pass any signals, any electrical impulses from the central nervous system to our effectors. And the effector is essentially a muscle or a gland which brings about an effect. So if I touch something really hot, the muscle is the effector because it brings about change. It moves my arm away. Okay? Now, what we're looking at, okay, is our behavior. How do we coordinate our response? We want to now look at a reflex action. Reflex actions are very important in terms of the nervous system. Reflex actions can prevent us from undergoing harm, or even they can help us with survival. Okay? Now, reflex actions, in terms of the pathway it takes, are similar to our normal conscious actions. The only difference is they involve a relay neuron in the spinal cord or an unconscious part of the brain. Okay? Any reflex does not need to go to the conscious part of the brain for processing. Why? Because imagine a reflex, if I was to touch something very hot, this is my reflex. If I was to wait for a signal to go to my brain and me think, well, this is quite hot, this could cause me harm. Let me move my arm. My hand could already be damaged, okay? It could already have undergone harm. So, reflexes need to happen very quickly, which is why they are involuntary, okay? They are automatic responses, okay? Now, if we was to look at an example of a reflex, how could this happen? Alright? Again, let's use the something of touching something very hot. You just put your hand on the stove, it's very hot. That is a stimuli. The change in our environment, a stimulus, sorry. Okay? Now the stimulus is detected by our sense organs, so our receptors, our sensory receptors, the sense organs. Because it's our sense organs, they are connected to our first neuron. The first neuron is the sensory neuron because it's connected to our sensory organs. The sensory organs would then pass on an electrical impulse, okay, to the relay neuron, which is the next neuron. The relay neuron, as we said before, is in the spinal cord. Okay, a response will be coordinated, all right, and that electrical impulse will then be sent along our motor neuron. Okay, the role of the motor neuron is to really pass that signal as quickly as possible to our effector, whatever is going to bring about an effect. So it could be a muscle, it could be a gland. In this example, it is our muscle. So our motor neuron will contract, moving my hand away, preventing me from harm. Okay? That happens very quickly, hence why it doesn't need to go to the conscious part of the brain, because that would take too long. Okay? Now, guys, if we look, this is what happened. We touched something, okay? Something very hot. The heat was the stimulus, the change in the environment. Okay? That change in the environment was picked up by our receptors, okay? Our sense organs, all right? That's a signal was then sent along our sensory neuron, okay, to our relay neuron. Okay, don't forget we said our relay neuron was in our spinal cord. Okay, now the relay neuron will pass the signal on to our motor neuron, which is connected to our effector. The effector brings about the change or the response. Okay, in this example it was the effector, the muscle contracted to move my hand and my arm away. Okay, now why are reflexes important? They could prevent us from harm. Okay, they could help animals find food, moving away or sheltering from predators, and even helping animals move towards mates. Okay, so reflexes are really important. A good example is if you were to shine a light into your eyes. Okay, now you're going to look at the eyes in the next topic. Okay, but if you were to shine a light into your eyes, your pupils will constrict. Okay, they will get smaller, and this is to prevent excess light from entering the eye. And we're going to look at why in the next video. Okay, now let's sum up what we looked at. Okay, a reflex action. We have our stimuli, which is picked up by our sense organ or our receptor. The signal is passed along our sensory neuron to our relay neuron, okay, which takes impulses, all right. The relay neuron, remember we said, is in the spinal cord, all right. The relay neuron will send that impulse, okay, the electrical impulse, along the motor neuron and eventually to the effector, which will bring about the effect, the response. This is an involuntary pathway, guys. We do not think about it. Okay, if I was to touch something, I wouldn't think about it. Okay, it would happen automatically. If it was a voluntary response, guys, we would then have our sensory sense organs, our receptors. The signal will go from our sensory neuron to our spinal cord, to our brain for processing, to our motor neuron, then to our effector. Okay, but luckily, if we're in danger, we don't have to think about it. Now, guys, if we look at our neurons, they are not directly connected. Remember we said sensory neuron to relay neuron to motor neuron. They are not directly connected. Okay? There are gaps between each neuron. So imagine this is the sensory neuron and this is the relay neuron. Alright? Now, these gaps, alright, are called synaptic clefts. Alright? The ends of the neurons, okay, and the cleft, okay, synaptic cleft, they are called a synapse. So for example, this is known as a synapse. Now, you've got to imagine, guys, when an electrical impulse, imagine from the sensory neuron, wants to be passed along the relay neuron, okay, they are not connected. So it must happen some way. How does it happen? All right, at the ends of the neurons, okay, we have vesicles, and these vesicles have little neurotransmitters. These are essentially messengers. And what will happen is these neurotransmitters will diffuse across the synapse very quickly, and they will combine with a receptor which is on the following neuron. Okay, this will happen because they will have a complementary shape. Now, what will happen is when the neurotransmitter binds with a receptor on the following neuron, the electrical impulse will then continue along the following neuron. Alright, and that is how signals are able to be passed very quickly from neuron to neuron, even though they are not connected. Okay? So guys, hopefully now you're able to name the neurons and the structures involved in the nervous system. Hopefully you're able to outline the process of a reflex. And finally, hopefully you're able to explain the process of nerve impulses crossing a synapse. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe and revise. Mr. Ashodi, signing out.